The rain had not stopped for 7 days. It fell in sheets of gray steel, turning the earth outside Ironhold Keep into a slurry of freezing mud. It was the kind of cold that should have bitten through to the bone, the kind that turned breath into ghosts and fingers into ice. But Elara didn't feel it. She knelt in the slush, her knees soaked through the thin fabric of her servant's dress. Her hands, red and raw, moved in small, reverent circles against the rough granite of the Blackstone marker. She wasn't crying. She had run out of tears weeks ago. Now, there was only the hollow ache in her chest, a void where her heart used to beat. She scrubbed away a patch of dark moss, revealing the letters chiseled there 3 months ago. The lie that had ended her life. Alaric Blackwood, king, warrior, gone, gone, she whispered, the word lost to the wind. It wasn't just a word, it was a sentence, a condemnation. When the river supposedly swallowed Alaric's body, it had swallowed her status, her protection, and her future. The intended queen of the Obsidian realm was now nothing more than a ghost haunting the edge of the tree line. Behind her, the squelch of heavy boots broke the rhythm of the falling rain. Elara didn't turn. She knew that stride, heavy with arrogance, thick with cruel satisfaction. You're here again, the voice dripped with contempt. Silas, the usurper, the man who sat on Alaric's throne like a vulture perched on a corpse. Elara kept scrubbing the stone, her jaw set. It's the anniversary of his burial. Silas, it's a waste of time. He sneered. He stepped closer, his shadow falling over her, darker than the storm clouds. With a casual, the vicious flick of his boot, he kicked the small wooden bowl of winter berries she had placed as an offering. The bowl clattered across the stones, the red berries scattering in the mud like drops of fresh blood. He's rot in the river. Girl, Silas said, his voice dropping to a low, oily growl. 3 months dead. The pack needs to move on. I have moved on. Elara finally looked up. Her eyes, once bright with the promise of a crown, were dull and ringed with exhaustion. You never mourned him. You only coveted what was his. Silas laughed. A harsh, grating sound. He crouched down, forcing his level with hers. The smell of stale wine and unwashed furs wafted off him. I took what was necessary. Leadership requires strength. Elara, not. Whatever this is. He gestured vaguely at her. At the grave. At the pathetic display of loyalty. Suddenly, his hand shot out. He gripped her chin, his fingers digging into her skin hard enough to bruise. Elara flinched. But she didn't pull away. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction of her fear. Stop polishing a ghost, Silas hissed, his face inches from hers. You've forgotten your place. You think because you were his bedwarmer. You still hold rank. You hold nothing. He released her with a shove that sent her sprawling back into the mud. He towered over her, adjusting his cloak against the wind. The northern alphas are arriving in 3 days, he announced, the words striking her harder than his hand had. The auction is set. You go to the highest bidder. Elara's breath hitched. No, you can't. I am a citizen of the— You are currency, Silas roared, his patience snapping. You have no family, no pack, no protector. You are a pretty omega with a broken gift. In 3 days, you will be sold, shipped off to some distant territory, and broken to breed for a new master. I suggest you make your peace with your dead king before then, because this is the last time you'll see this stone. He turned on his heel, mud flying, and stalked back toward the fortress walls. Elara sat in the freezing muck, trembling. 3 days, 72 hours before she was erased completely. She looked back at the cold stone marker, pressing her palm flat against the name Alaric. I don't know how to do this without you, she whispered, her voice cracking. I don't know how to survive what's coming. The stone offered no answer. The wind offered no comfort, but deep in the forest, hidden among the ancient, rain-slicked pines, the shadows were listening, 50 yards away, concealed by the dense canopy and the gloom of the storm. A pair of amber eyes burned with a ferocity that could melt steel. Alaric Blackwood was not wrought in a river. He was very much alive, and he was furious. From his vantage point in the tree line, the true king of the obsidian realm watched his mate fall into the mud. His hands, scarred and rough, gripped the bark of a massive pine tree with enough force to splinter the wood. His claws, sharp and lethal, extended without conscious thought, shredding the timber as he fought the urge, the overwhelming, primal scream in his blood to charge across the open ground. Kill him, the wolf inside him howls, thrashing against the cage of his discipline. Tear his throat out. Burn the world. Claim her. Alaric's chest heaved. Seeing Elara like this, it was a torture worse than the poison that had nearly killed him. She was thinner than he remembered. The soft curves he used to trace with reverent fingers in the dark had sharpened into fragile angles. Her face, once always ready with a smile that was only for him, was haunted. He did this to her. He watched Silas grab her chin, and a low, vibrating growl ripped from Alaric's throat. It took every ounce of his legendary will to keep his feet planted. 3 days, he thought, the rage settling into a cold, hard knot in his gut. Just 3 days. He couldn't move yet. Silas wasn't just a cruel uncle. He was a paranoid usurper. There were archers on the battlements, spies in the scullery, and a conspiracy that ran deeper than Alaric had realized 3 months ago. When the poison administered by his own council had paralyzed him during the ambush, they had dumped him in the river to drown. They hadn't counted on his strength. They hadn't counted on his rage. He had dragged himself onto the muddy banks miles downstream, half dead, his veins burning with toxicity. It had taken him 90 days to heal. 90 days of hiding in caves, eating raw meat, and rebuilding his strength while the world believed him dead. He had to be smart. If he revealed himself now, before his network of loyalists was in position, Silas would kill Elara before Alaric could cross the field. He would use her as a shield. Or worse, Alaric watched Elara pull herself out of the mud, her small frame shaking against the wind. The pain of not going to her, of not wrapping her in his cloak and taking her pain away, was physical. It felt like a blade twisting in his gut. Hold on, my love, he whispered into the storm, his voice rough with disuse. Just hold on a little longer. He looked toward the retreating figure of Silas, and his expression shifted from pained longing to predatory malice. You want to sell her? Uncle Alaric murmured, his lips curling back to reveal a flash of white fang. You want to auction off my heart, invite the world. Let them come. Let them all gather in one room. He released the tree, leaving deep gouges in the wood. You won't see the sunrise on the 4th day. With the silent grace of a predator who has finally chosen his prey, the king vanished back into the shadows. The hunters were about to become the hunted. The transition from the graveyard to the fortress was a descent into a different kind of hell. By the time Elara reached the kitchens of Ironhold Keep, the numbness of the cold had been replaced by the stifling, greasy heat of the scullery. The air here was thick with the smell of roasting pork and stale mildew. It was a sensory assault, a sharp reminder of how far she had fallen. You're late, Omega. The shout came from the head cook, a woman whose cruelty was only matched by her loyalty to Silas. She slammed a basket of unwashed root vegetables onto a table. The king expects a feast for the guests. Scrub, and if I see a speck of dirt, you won't eat tonight. Elara didn't argue. She didn't have the energy. She moved to the basin, plunging her freezing hands into the tepid, dirty water. Scrub, rinse, peel. The rhythm was monotonous, almost meditative. It allowed her mind to drift, dangerous and unbidden, to memories of the past. To Alaric, she remembered the way he used to look at her not as a resonant with a useful gift, but as a woman he adored. She remembered the heat of his skin, the safety of his presence. She remembered how her gift, her soul weaving, used to hum beneath her skin whenever he was near. A constant, golden song of connection. Since his death, the music had stopped. Her gift had gone silent, withered by grief. She was a soul weaver who could no longer feel a soul. Ow, damn it! The sharp cry snapped Elara out of her trance. Across the kitchen, Jana, a stable boy no older than 12, who had been drafted into kitchen duty, dropped a heavy cleaver. He clutched his forearm, blood instantly welling up between his fingers. Dark and fast, the other servants froze, terrified. In Silas's court, injury meant weakness, and weakness meant punishment. "Stupid boy," the cook yelled, raising a ladle as if to strike him, ruining the meat. Elara moved before she thought. She crossed the kitchen in 3 strides, ignoring the cook, and dropped to her knees beside the boy. "Let me see," she commanded, her voice holding a flicker of the authority she had once carried as the intended queen. "It hurts," Jana whimpered, his face gray with shock. The gash was deep, slicing down to the muscle. "Shh. Look at me," Elara said softly. She pried his fingers away from the wound. Normally, she would have called for bandages. She would have applied pressure. But as her hands hovered over the torn flesh, something impossible happened. A spark. It started in her chest, a sudden, sharp flutter, like a bird waking up after a long winter. It rushed down her arms, warm and golden and electric. For 3 months, she had been a vessel emptied of water. Now, suddenly, the tap was turned on. Her hands began to glow with a faint, iridescent light. The kitchen went silent. Even the cook lowered her ladle, her mouth falling open. Elara gasped, feeling the surge of energy. It wasn't just her power, it felt amplified, stronger than before. It felt like an answer to a question she hadn't realized she asked. She pressed her glowing palm against Jonah's arm. The boy stopped crying instantly. The angry red edges of the wound began to knit together, the skin stitching itself up as if time were rewinding. Within seconds, the blood vanished. The gash was gone, leaving nothing but a faint, silvery line. Elara pulled her hand back, staring at her own palm in shock. Her heart hammered against her ribs, not with fear, but with a sudden, overwhelming rhythm. Thump, 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 thump. It was a heartbeat, but it wasn't hers. The bond, the realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. Her gift relied on emotional resonance, on the connection to her pack, but specifically on her mate. It had died when he died. If the power was back, if the song was humming again, Elara looked up, her gaze drifting toward the high, narrow windows that looked out over the stormy forest. The kitchen faded away. The cook's shouting became background noise. "He's not gone," she whispered, the truth blooming in her chest like a terrifying, beautiful flower. Somewhere out there, in the rain and the dark, a heart was beating in time with hers. The king was not dead, and for the first time in 90 days, Elara didn't feel alone. She felt ready. The servants' quarters smelled of mildew and despair. A damp, the suffocating scent that clung to the thin pallets and the rough wool blankets. It was the dead of night. The heavy rhythm of the rain outside had finally slowed to a drizzle, leaving a silence that felt louder than the storm. Elara woke with a gasp. She didn't know what had pulled her from her fitful sleep. There was no sound. The 6 other servants in the room were still breathing in the shallow, exhausted rhythm of the overworked. But her skin prickled. The fine hairs on her arms stood up, an instinctive alarm ringing in the base of her skull. Something was wrong. Or perhaps something was right. She sat up, clutching her blanket to her chest. The room was dark, illuminated only by a sliver of moonlight cutting through the high, barred window. But the darkness in the corner, it moved. It wasn't just a shadow. It had weight. It had mass. It detached itself from the stone wall, coalescing into a shape she knew better than her own reflection. Alara's breath caught in her throat. She should have screamed. She should have run. Silas had guards posted at every door, and a scream would bring them running in seconds. But her voice died before it reached her lips. "You're not real," she whispered, the words trembling in the cold air. "You're dead. I buried you." "Am I?" The voice was rough, broken, like gravel grinding against steel. It was a voice she hadn't heard in 3 months. A voice she thought she would never hear again outside of her tortured dreams. The figure stepped into the sliver of moonlight. Elara's heart stopped. It was him. Alaric. But not the polished king in ceremonial armor she remembered. This man was thinner, his face shadowed by weeks of beard growth. He wore rough traveling leathers, stained with mud and forest sap. A fresh, angry scar cut across his left cheek. A brutal souvenir of violence. But his eyes, those amber eyes, were unmistakably, impossibly alive. How Elara sobbed. The single word carrying the weight of 90 days of mourning. "I've been dying every day since you left." He crossed the room in 2 long strides, ignoring the risk, ignoring the noise. He fell to his knees beside her pallet. Not as a king, but as a penitent man. "I know," he choked out. "I know. And I am so sorry." "Elara," she raised her hands, intending to push him away, to beat her fists against his chest for the cruelty of leaving her alone. But the moment her palms touched the rough leather of his tunic, the anger evaporated. He was solid. He was warm. He smelled of pine needles, rain, and the metallic tang of old blood. He was real. "You let me think you were gone," she wept, her hands clutching his tunic, pulling him closer, as if to anchor him to the earth. "I felt the bond go silent. I felt you die. Poison," Alaric murmured, his hands coming up to cup her face, his thumbs brushing away the tears that spilled hot and fast down her cheeks. "It mimics death, slows the heart until it's nearly undetectable. By the time I woke, they had already dumped me in the river. Silas had already seized the crown. Why didn't you come back?" she demanded. Though her voice lacked heat, she leaned into his touch, starving for it. Why stay hidden while he... Because the assassination wasn't just bandits. Alaric's eyes darkened, the amber turning to molten gold. "It came from inside my own court. Silas, the council. If I had revealed myself before I was ready, they would have finished the job. And this time, they wouldn't have stopped with me. They would have killed you to ensure my line ended." The realization crashed over her. He hadn't stayed away to save himself. He had stayed dead to save her. "You endured this hell to protect me," she whispered. "I have spent every waking moment of the last 3 months building a network," he vowed, his forehead pressing against hers, identifying every traitor, waiting for the moment to strike. But then, his voice dropped to a lethal growl. "Then I heard about the auction." His grip on her face tightened. "Possessing her. No one touches you. Elara. No one sells you. No one lays a single finger on what is mine. I'm not property," she breathed, an echo of her defiance in the graveyard. "No," he corrected, fierce and immediate. You are my mate. My heart. The only reason I crawled out of that river. And then he kissed her. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was desperate. It was the collision of two stars that had been drifting in the dark. As their lips met, the dam inside Elara broke. The bond that silent, withered thing in her chest roared back to life. It didn't just trickle. It flooded her. She felt him. Really felt him. She felt his guilt, crushing and heavy. She felt his rage, sharp as a blade. But mostly, she felt his love. It was a tsunami. Overwhelming and absolute. 3 days. He whispered against her mouth, pulling back just enough to look into her eyes. I need you to endure 3 more days. Give me until the night of the auction to finish what I've started. And then she asked, terrified to hope. Alaric's smile was terrifying. It was the smile of a wolf who had cornered a rabbit. And then, he promised, I burn this kingdom down for you. As Alaric held her in the dark, the renewed bond pulled them under, dragging them away from the mildew and the fear, back into the safety of memory. 6 months ago, the transition was jarring. The cold stone floor vanished, replaced by the softness of high thread count linen. The smell of rain was gone, usurped by the scent of blooming jasmine and warm sunlight. They were in the royal tower. It was the golden hour. That magical time of day when the light turns everything to honey. Elara lay back against the pillows, laughing. It was a free, unburdened sound she hadn't made since the funeral. Alaric hovered over her, his hair longer then, cleaner, shining in the sun. He wasn't wearing his armor. He wasn't wearing his crown. He was just Alaric. He was tracing the line of her collarbone with a flower he had stolen from the royal greenhouse, a blue moon lily. Rare and delicate. Why me, she had asked him then, her voice teasing but laced with genuine insecurity. You are the Alpha King. You could have any wolf in the realm. Highborns. Warriors. Why a resonant with no family? Alaric had stopped his teasing. He had gone still, his expression turning serious in a way that always made her breath catch. He sat up, the setting sun casting his profile in shadow. Because you see me, he had said simply. Not the crown, not the power. Me, he looked at her, his eyes searching hers with a vulnerability the rest of the world would never believe existed in the terrifying Wolf King. You see the man who is terrified of failing his people, he murmured, his hand finding hers. The boy who still misses his mother. The wolf who spent years believing he was too broken to be loved. He brought her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles. Every other woman in this court looks at me and sees a weapon to be wielded or a title to be won. You look at me, Elara, and you just see Alaric. You feel the truth of me, and you stayed anyway. I stayed because you're worth it, she had whispered, pulling him down for a kiss. Because when I'm with you, I finally feel whole. The memory was warm, safe, and perfect. It was a reminder of what had been stolen. And then, like a candle snuffed out by a sudden draft, the memory vanished. Elara was back in the cold dark. The sunlight was gone. The linen was gone. She was lying on a pallet of straw, and Alaric was pulling away, slipping toward the window like a thief in the night. Wait, she whispered, grabbing his hand. Don't leave me again. Please, I have to, he said, his voice ragged. If they find me here tonight, everything falls apart. Silas needs to think he has won. I need him arrogant. Arrogant men make mistakes. He climbed onto the sill, silhouetted against the stormy sky. Stay alive for me, Elara, he commanded softly. I'll come for you. I promise. And then he was gone. The next 2 days passed in a blur of terrifying clarity. Elara was no longer just a servant. She was a spy. The bond with Alaric was wide open now. thrumming beneath her skin like a second pulse. It didn't just connect her to him, it amplified her gift of resonance to levels she had never experienced before. She moved through the fortress with her head down, scrubbing floors, changing linens, carrying trays. To the court. She was invisible, a piece of furniture, a broken omega. But she was seeing everything. She saw the emotions of the people around her not just as feelings, but as colors, tastes. When she polished the silver in the council chamber, she focused on the guards. The ones loyal to Silas radiated a sickly, sulphurous yellow aura. They tasted like copper and betrayal on the back of her tongue. But others, the younger guards, the ones who had served under Alaric, they radiated a muted, dusty blue, sadness, fear. They tasted like ash. They are afraid of him. She realized. They serve Silas out of fear, not loyalty. She gathered every scrap of information she could. She noted the patrol shifts. She memorized which gates were left undermanned. She listened to the whispers of the kitchen staff, learning where the weapons were being stockpiled, and she passed it all on. At night, under the pretense of emptying the ash bins, she slipped small scraps of parchment into a hollow in the garden wall, a gap between the stones hidden by winter ivy. She never saw Alaric. It was too risky. But she felt him. A warm, comforting pressure at the back of her mind. Acknowledging every message. Counselor Thorne meets with Silas after midnight. She wrote, Captain Draven has doubled the guards on the East Tower. The response would come as a sensation, a pulse of gratitude, a flash of determination. But the tension was rising. The castle was a pressure cooker waiting to explode. On the afternoon of the second day, Silas cornered her. She was in the hallway outside the Great Hall, carrying a stack of linens. Silas stepped out of the shadows, blocking her path. He looked haggard. His eyes were bloodshot, and he smelled of stale wine and paranoia. You seem different, Silas murmured, circling her. He sniffed the air near her neck, making her skin crawl. Less moping. More purpose. I have accepted my fate. My king. Elara lied, keeping her eyes on the floor. Her voice was steady, smoothed by the practice of survival. There is no point in grieving forever. Silas narrowed his eyes. He wasn't convinced. He could feel it too, the shift in the atmosphere. The way the shadows seemed to stretch longer than they should. The way the wind howled around the towers like a pack of wolves. You're hiding something, he hissed. He raised his hand, the heavy signet ring on his finger catching the light. If I find out you are conspiring with loyalists, he stepped forward, his hand raising to strike. Elara flinched, bracing for the blow. Bam! The heavy wooden shutters at the end of the corridor slammed open with violent force, as if hit by a battering ram. A freezing gust of wind tore through the hallway, extinguishing the torches and plunging them into gray twilight. Silas spun around, his hand dropping to his sword hilt. "Who's there?" he shouted, his voice cracking. "Show yourself." There was no one there. Just the wind, just the smell of pine and rain. But Elara knew. She felt the surge of protective rage spike through the bond. Alaric was close. Too close. He had almost broken cover to stop Silas from hitting her. Silas backed away, his face pale. The fear she had sensed in him earlier blossomed into terror. He looked at the open window, then back at Elara, his eyes wide. 2 days, he whispered, more to himself than to her. Just get her sold. Get her gone. He stalked away, looking over his shoulder at the empty air. The night before the auction arrived with a silence that felt heavy enough to crush bone. Elara lay on her pallet, staring at the ceiling. She was fully dressed beneath her blanket. Her boots were laced tight. Elara. The voice wasn't in the room. It was in her head. Clear. Resonant. She closed her eyes, focusing on the connection. I'm here. Be ready at dawn. Alaric's mental voice was tight, coiled like a spring. When the first light hits the towers, cover your ears when the howling starts. Elara's heart raced. It was happening. Tomorrow, the nightmare would end. But as she lay there, extending her senses one last time, a cold knot formed in her stomach. She reached out with her gift, scanning the castle for Silas. She found him in his chambers. But he wasn't alone. There was another presence with him. Something she hadn't felt before. It wasn't the sulphurous yellow of a traitorous guard or the red of a violent soldier. It was black. It was a void. A sucking, empty darkness that tasted of bile and decay. A dark mage. Elara's eyes snapped open. Silas hadn't just hired mercenaries. He had brought in a magic user, someone who dealt in forbidden arts. Someone whose power felt eerily similar to the poison that had suppressed Alaric's heart. The realization hit her with terrifying clarity. Silas wasn't just paranoid, he was prepared. He knew. On some level, that conventional steel wouldn't stop the true king. He had set a trap. Alaric. She projected her thought desperately, trying to push the warning down the bond. It's a trap. There's magic. Dark magic. But the bond was silent. He was blocking her out, focusing entirely on the battle to come, shielding her from his own bloodlust. She sat up, clutching the rough wool of her blanket. The plan was for a rescue. But Elara knew, with the sickening certainty of a seer, that they were walking into a slaughter. Don't come, she whispered to the empty room, knowing he couldn't hear her. Please, don't come. But the sun was already beginning to bleed into the horizon, and in the distance, the first howl tore through the morning silence. The great hall of Ironhold Keep had been transformed into a marketplace of flesh and greed, where once hung the banners of House Blackwood Stark. Noble obsidian wolves on fields of silver now hung the gaudy crimson tapestries of the usurper. The air was thick, suffocatingly hot, and heavy with the scent of roasted meats, spilled wine, and the acrid perfume of too many bodies packed into one space. Elara stood on the raised dais, her hands bound before her with rough hemp rope. They had dressed her in a gown of thin, white silk, a mockery of a wedding dress, designed not to cover, but to display. She shivered, not from cold this time, but from the sensation of 100 pairs of eyes crawling over her skin. Below her, the floor was a sea of unfamiliar faces. The northern alphas had arrived. Rough men with scars carved into their faces and cruelty etched into their souls. Coastal warlords draped in furs. Merchants who dealt in the illicit trade of magical creatures. And sitting on the throne, Alaric's throne, was Silas. He lounged, a goblet of wine tilting dangerously in his hand, his face flushed with the intoxication of absolute power. He looked at Elara not as a niece-in-law, not as a person, but as the final loose end of a coup he was desperate to finish. Gentlemen, Silas's voice boomed across the hall, silencing the murmurs. He stood, swaying slightly. We begin the bidding for the Omega. Young, healthy, and formerly royal property. A ripple of laughter went through the crowd. It was an ugly sound, scraping against Elara's nerves like a rusty knife. Do I hear 500 gold pieces? Silas shouted. 600. A voice bellowed from the back. 7, shouted another. Elara's breath came in shallow. Panicked gasps. She scanned the room, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Where are you? She screamed internally, sending the thought down the bond. Alaric. Please. Where are you? The bond was there, a hum of static at the back of her mind, but it was quiet. Too quiet. Like the breath held before a scream. 800, a man in the front row sneered. He was a brute from the ice wastes. His teeth filed into points. I need a breeder for my winter stock. Silas grinned. raising his gavel. 800 gold pieces for the girl going once. Elara closed her eyes. She could feel the darkness closing in. The mage she had sensed the night before, the shadow at Silas's side, was watching her. She could taste the bile of his dark magic on her tongue, going twice. Silas yelled, his eyes gleaming with triumph. Elara braced herself. Sold to the boom. The sound wasn't a knock. It wasn't an opening. It was an explosion. The massive oak doors of the great hall didn't just swing open. They shattered. Wood splintered into a million pieces, flying inward like shrapnel. The heavy iron hinges screamed as they were torn from the stone. The hall went dead silent. Dust billowed in the entryway, swirling in the sudden draft. And from that cloud of destruction, a figure emerged. He didn't sneak. He didn't run. He strode. Alaric Blackwood walked into the hall of his enemies with the casual, lethal grace of a god of war. He was stripped to the waist, his chest painted with the white clay of mourning and the fresh, wet red of blood. In his hand, he held a heavy broadsword that dripped crimson onto the stone floor, but it was his eyes that froze the room. They were burning gold, glowing with a bioluminescent rage that made the torches on the walls flicker and dim. Behind him, out of the swirling dust, came the low, vibrating rumble of growls. One by one, massive wolves stepped into the light. Gray wolves, black wolves, timber wolves, 50 of the realm's most loyal fighters. Teeth bared, hackles raised, ready to tear the throat out of anyone who moved. Silas dropped his goblet. It shattered, red wine spreading like a premonition across the dais. "You," Silas whispered, his face draining of color. "You're dead." Alaric stopped in the center of the hall. He looked at the bidders, who were shrinking back against the walls. He looked at the guards, whose hands were trembling on their hilts. And then, he looked at Silas. "I tried to be dead." "Uncle," Alaric said. His voice wasn't a shout, but it carried to every corner of the room, deep and resonant as a funeral bell. "But I found the accommodations lacking." He raised his sword, pointing it directly at the throne. "And," Alaric continued, his lips curling into a feral snarl, "I believe that is my seat." For a heartbeat, no one moved. The tension was a physical weight, pressing down until the air felt thin. Then, Silas screamed, "Kill him! Kill them all!" Chaos erupted. It was absolute. Cinematic violence. The loyalist wolves surged forward, a tidal wave of fur and fangs crashing into the confused guards. The sound was deafening, the clash of steel, the roar of shifters changing form, the screams of the foreign bidders scrambling for the exits. Elara dropped to her knees as an arrow whizzed past her head. She struggled against the ropes binding her wrists. Snap. The friction burned. But she didn't care. Below her, Alaric was a blur of motion. He was a storm of steel. He moved with a brutality she had never seen, cutting a path through the guards as if they were made of paper. He wasn't fighting for glory. He wasn't fighting for honor. He was fighting to get to her. A guard lunged at him from the left. Alaric didn't even look. He backhanded the man with his clawed gauntlet, sending him flying, and drove his sword through the chest of another. "Elara," he roared over the din of battle. "I'm here," she screamed back. She finally worked one hand free, shredding the rope. Silas was scrambling backward, trying to retreat behind the throne. But the dark mage, the shadow in the corner, stepped forward. He didn't draw a sword. He didn't shift. He simply raised a hand, his palm glowing with a sickly, necrotic green light. Elara's gift flared. She felt the magic building. It tasted like rot. It tasted like the poison that had killed Alaric 3 months ago. The mage wasn't aiming at Alaric. He knew Alaric was too fast, too protected by his rage. He was aiming at the dais. "Alaric, look out," Elara screamed. but her voice was lost in the clash of swords. The mage flicked his wrist. A dagger materialized from the green smoke, a jagged blade of black glass, dripping with viscous liquid. With an unnatural hiss, it flew across the room. Time seemed to slow down. Elara saw the blade coming. She saw the malicious grin on Silas's face. She froze, unable to move, unable to breathe. But Alaric saw it too. He was halfway up the stairs to the dais. He didn't have time to deflect it. He didn't have time to shout. He did the only thing that mattered. He threw himself into the air. He leaped between Elara and the projectile, his body forming a living shield. Thwack! The sound was sickeningly wet. The black dagger didn't hit the stone wall. It didn't hit Elara. It buried itself deep into Alaric's chest, right beside his heart. The momentum knocked him backward. He crashed onto the dais at Elara's feet, the sword slipping from his hand. No, the scream tore from Elara's throat. Raw and jagged, she fell to her knees, her hands hovering over him, terrified to touch, terrified not to. The hall seemed to freeze. The wolves stopped fighting. The guards lowered their weapons. Everyone watched the king fall. Alaric gasped, his back arching off the stone. Black veins were already spreading from the wound, spider webbing across his chest with terrifying speed. It was the same poison, the same nightmare. Alaric. Elara sobbed, pressing her hands to his face. Stay with me. Look at me. His amber eyes were unfocused, glazing over. Elara. He wheezed. Blood dark. Black blood bubbling past his lips. Safe. You're safe, you idiot, she cried, tears streaming down her face, mixing with the blood on his skin. You promised you wouldn't leave me again. From behind the throne, a laugh echoed. Cold, cruel, victorious, Silas stepped out, stepping over the body of a fallen guard. He looked down at his nephew, at the black dagger protruding from his chest, and smiled. History repeats. Nephew Silas crowed, spreading his arms wide. You always did have a weakness for strays, and just like your father, your heart was too soft for this world. He turned to the mage. Finish the girl. Slowly, the mage stepped forward, green fire gathering in his hands. Elara looked at Alaric. His breathing was a rattle. His heart, she could feel it through the bond, was fluttering like a dying moth. Thump. Thump. Silence. He was dying. Again. And this time, there was no river to wash him away. There was only the cold stone and the laughter of the man who killed him. Something inside Elara snapped. It wasn't a break. It was a release. The grief that had hollowed her out for 3 months. The fear that had kept her small. The rules that said she was just an omega. Just a servant. Just a girl. It all incinerated. She looked at the mage. Then she looked at Silas. She didn't scream in terror. She screamed in fury. Get back. The sound wasn't human. It was the voice of the earth cracking open. Elara slammed her hands onto Alaric's chest. But this time, she didn't ask the magic to heal. She didn't plead. She commanded. Her soul weaver gift, fueled by the desperate, volatile love of a fated mate, exploded. It wasn't a gentle glow. It was a supernova, a shockwave of blinding, white gold light erupted from her body. It blasted outward in a perfect ring. The dark mage didn't even have time to scream. The light hit him and vaporized the green shadow magic instantly. He was thrown backward, crashing through the long banquet table. Unconscious before he hit the wood, Silas was lifted off his feet and slammed against the stone wall. Pinned there by the sheer force of the pressure, the light didn't stop. It washed over the loyal wolves, reinvigorating them. It washed over the traitors, forcing them to their knees, crushed by the weight of pure, concentrated authority, but the center of the storm was Alaric. Elara poured everything she was, her soul, her life force, her rage into the wound. Burn it out. She commanded the light. Burn it all out. The black veins on Alaric's chest began to retreat. The poison hissed and evaporated. Rising as dark steam, the wound sizzled. The flesh knitting together. Muscle reconnecting. Skin sealing beneath her hands. The fluttering moth of his heart turned into a drum. Boom boom. Boom boom. Alaric's eyes snapped open. The glaze was gone. The amber was back. Brighter than the sun. He took a massive, gasping breath. Filling his lungs with air, Elara collapsed forward. Exhausted. Her light fading to a soft simmer. Alaric, he sat up. He didn't look at the wound. He didn't look at the crowd. He looked at Silas, who was sliding down the wall. Dazed and terrified, Alaric rose. He pulled the black dagger out of his own chest. It clattered uselessly to the floor and picked up his sword. He didn't stride this time. He stalked. The silence in the hall was absolute. No one dared to breathe. Silas scrambled to his feet, holding up a shaking hand. Alaric. Wait. We can share. Alaric didn't stop. He didn't speak. He didn't blink. I am your blood, Silas screamed, backing into the corner. I am your kin. You, Alaric said, his voice terrifyingly calm, are nothing. Silas drew a hidden knife, lunging in a last, desperate attempt. Alaric moved faster than thought. A flash of steel. A singular, efficient arc. It was clean. It was brutal. It was necessary. Silas fell. The usurper was dead before he hit the ground. Alaric stood over him for a moment, his chest heaving, the blood on his skin stark against the pale scars. He turned to the room. He looked at the council members who had betrayed him. He looked at the guards who had watched Elara suffer. He threw his sword down. The clang echoed like a gavel stroke. Is there anyone else? He asked softly. The remaining guards dropped their weapons, one by one. Then all at once, the entire great hall dropped to their knees. The northern alphas bowed their heads. The merchants prostrated themselves. Long live the king, someone shouted. Long live the king, the roar answered. But Alaric wasn't listening. He turned his back on them. He turned his back on the throne. He walked back to the dais, where Elara was trying to stand, her legs shaking from the magical exhaustion. He didn't wait for her to rise. He dropped to his knees in front of her, the Alpha King, kneeling before his Omega in front of the entire world. Elara, he breathed, his hands hovering over her, checking her frantically. Are you hurt? Did he touch you? I'm fine, she whispered, touching his chest where the wound had been moments ago. There was nothing there but a faint, silver scar. You died. I told you. He managed a crooked, exhausted smile, leaning his forehead against hers. I refuse to leave you alone. You're terrible at staying out of trouble. She let out a wet, choked laugh, burying her face in his neck. I hate you. I love you, he murmured into her hair. More than breath, more than the crown. He stood up, pulling her with him. He didn't let go of her hand. He looked out at the kneeling crowd, at the carnage and the victory. Get up, he commanded. The court rose. Uncertain, terrified, Alaric pulled Elara forward. He didn't position her behind him. He didn't position her to the side. He placed her exactly parallel to him. Look at her, Alaric ordered. His voice was steel wrapped in velvet. 3 months ago, you watched her mourn. You watched her bleed. You watched her scrub your floors and suffer your scorn. And you did nothing. The shame in the room was palpable. You call me king? Alaric continued, his grip on Elara's hand tightening. But let one thing be clear from this moment until the sun burns out. He turned to look at Elara. and the love in his eyes was so fierce it looked painful. "There is no king without this queen," he vowed. "She is the blood in my veins. She is the magic in these walls. You bow to her. You honor her. Or you leave my lands before nightfall." He looked back at the crowd, his eyes flashing. "Do you understand?" "Yes." "My king," the room thundered. "Yes." "My queen," Alaric turned to Elara. He reached out, brushing a stray lock of hair from her forehead. "Marry me," he whispered, low enough that only she could hear. "Properly this time. No politics. Just us." "Yes," she answered, tears slipping down her face. "Yes." He led her to the throne, the great chair of obsidian and gold. But he didn't sit in the center. He sat to the side, pulling her down to sit with him, sharing the seat, sharing the weight, sharing the rule. Elara rested her head on his shoulder, her hand clasped in his. Her gift, the soul weaver, hummed contentedly in her chest. The song was back. The pack was whole. The darkness had tried to swallow them. The earth had tried to claim them. But as she looked at their intertwined fingers, blood and gold mixing together, she realized the truth. They tried to bury them. They forgot they were seeds. And now, spring had finally come to the obsidian realm. You have been listening to the Shadow King's claim. If your heart is racing, if you felt the heat of the bond and the cold steel of the blade, then don't keep this story to yourself. Scroll down and tell us in the comments, what would you sacrifice for your fated mate? Hit that like button if you believe in love that conquers death. Share this video with a friend who needs a little romance and a little rage in their life today. And most importantly, make sure you are subscribe to Moonfire Tales and ring that bell. We have new stories of passion, magic, and destiny waiting for you every week. Until next time, keep the fire burning